So, one of the things that I've learned about relationships is that they can be so life-giving, they can be fun, they can be adventurous, and yet in the same breath, relationships can be a source of heartache. They can be a source of pain and frustration. And a lot of times that frustration and those negative feelings begin to creep into our relationships because of unmet expectations. Now, I don't know about you, but when it comes to relationships, I've definitely made my fair share of mistakes. You can just ask my wife about the night after our wedding day. She was upstairs and she was packing for our honeymoon, all while I was downstairs watching an Ohio State football game. Yes, I know. Some of you are cringing. I hear the oohs and ahs. I'm ashamed to even admit that, honestly. But not one of my finest moments, but fortunately my wife forgave me. And let's just say I've learned my lesson since then. But as a married couple, Rachel and I, one of the questions that we often get is people want to know the story and how we first met. And so I prepared a little clip here for you of just what that looks like. Check this out.
Can't sit here.
You know, it's funny what a young man recollects, because I don't remember being born. I don't recall what I got for my first Christmas. I don't know when I went on my first outdoor picnic, but I do remember the first time I heard the sweetest voice in the wide world.
You can sit here if you want.
I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life. She was like an angel.
Well, you're gonna sit down, aren't you?
I love it. Did you see the look on his face when Jenny asked him to sit down next to her? It was like a deer in headlights, shock and awe. And I laugh at that every time because that was the exact look that I had on my face the first time I met Rachel. So the real story and how we met. We were with a group of interns from CedarCreek on our way down to Atlanta for a conference. And of course, being the last one there and running late, I came to the bus, opened the doors, and was trying to find a seat. But nobody was willing to move over to let me sit down because they didn't want to sit in the middle for a 12-hour ride. Rachel was the only one that was kind enough to let me have a seat next to her. And so I often laugh about the story and how we met and use this clip as an example. And in my best Forrest Gump voice, I tell people, I found my Jenny. I still need a little bit of work with that, I know. But I got to tell you, the first time or in the beginning when we first started dating, it was actually pretty tough. And it was difficult because I realized that there were unmet expectations that I had that were causing issues in our relationship. Some of you might be here today and would say the same thing. Your relationship doesn't look the way that you want it. It's been tough. It's been difficult. Some of those unmet expectations are there and apparent. It could be your marriage. It could be a dating relationship. It could be a relationship with coworkers or with friends. But the Bible actually has a lot to say about relationships and how to navigate through our expectations within those relationships. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything that you do flows from it. Now, in the original text and language that this was written in, the word for heart actually refers to the inner being of a person, the control center of our thoughts and actions. And in that day and age, it was believed that the heart was where the issues of life came from. So that's why the Bible says, above all else, guard this. Guard your heart, because everything that you do starts and stems from what's on the inside here with your heart. And so when we look at this proverb, I think that it's telling us that managing our expectations in a relationship looks like living from a guarded heart. Now, that may be a little bit different than what you think it means, though. As I've read this in the past, I know I've interpreted this as a wall builder, a defensive posture. Guarding your heart almost seems to have a negative connotation. A wall builder is the kind of person that builds walls around their heart to keep people at arm's length. They try to keep people away from getting to the core of who they are because they've been hurt so many times before. It's a defense mechanism. Now, the other way that I've interpreted this is as a defender. A defender does just that. They protect their heart, the dream that's inside of their heart at all costs. When Rachel and I first started dating, like I said, it was pretty difficult, but if I'm honest, it was so difficult because of those unmet expectations that I thought I needed out of a relationship that I was about ready to call it quits after just 3 months. And the reason is because we were both coming into the relationship with certain expectations. We both had our walls up because we've experienced hurt in other relationships before. We had our defenses up as well because we were protecting a dream that God had for us, that we believed he had for us, but it seemed to be leading us in different directions. For her, she wanted to be a missionary in Africa. I wanted to be a youth pastor in Toledo. And so it looked a little different for each of us. But for you, that may look a little different as well. You may be in a spot where you're ready to call it quits in your relationship. You're frustrated. There's a little bit of bitterness. Your walls are built up. Some of those defensive postures are already there. But I want to introduce to you a different perspective that you may not have considered in what it means to live from a guarded heart. Mark 10:45 says, "The Son of Man, who is Jesus, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." And what this tells me is that Jesus completely redefined the dynamic of relationships as we understand it. Because what he did, instead of selfishly looking to see what he can take from a relationship, he's choosing to see how he can give and pour into the relationship selflessly, without expecting anything in return. I call this type of person a lavish giver. This is the person that guards their heart by generously giving, but not expecting anything in return. So you might be asking, if I lavishly give like you're talking about, then how does that actually mean guarding my heart? Well, when our expectations aren't met, what begins to happen? It leads to disappointment. It leads to frustration and anger. It may even cause insecurity and depression. The list can go on and on. That's one of the areas of tension in our relationship, are the disappointments and the expectations that we have. These emotions begin to rule our control center, and they fester to the point that it puts a strain on the relationship. And when expectations aren't met and then the disappointment begins to creep in, we're ready to call it quits. We're ready to give up and throw our hands in the air. But if we live with a guarded heart as a lavish giver, what happens is we begin to remove from the equation the root problem that's causing the tension in the relationship, the unmet expectations. What are those expectations in your relationship that are causing some of those issues? For me and Rachel, when we were dating, I thought, if I'm vulnerable in the relationship, if I'm willing to rearrange my schedule to make time, so that way we can hang out together and spend some time, quality time together, then she should be willing to do the same thing. She should meet me halfway. You might be the kind of person that is an amazing friend, and when a friend calls on you, you're ready to drop everything at the snap of a fingers to be there for them. And yet you may feel like the moment that you're in that spot and you need somebody, there's nobody in sight. You feel alone. You could be the type of hardworking person that goes above and beyond their job, that does extra responsibilities and puts in overtime, expecting to have some type of promotion. And when it doesn't happen, what happens? We feel the bitterness and frustration, and it takes a toll on our workplace relationships. But see, when we lavishly give without expecting to be repaid, our control center can't be polluted with disappointment. So living from a guarded heart takes on a new meaning. It doesn't mean putting up our walls around our heart. It doesn't mean putting our fists in the air in our best defensive posture. It means living like Christ through the example that he gave us, by removing the expectations and serving without expecting anything in return. Now, for me, this is a really hard thing to do. This has been incredibly challenging for me. But I know that the moments that I step into this, the moments that I invite Christ into my relationships, I find that my marriage is stronger. I find that my workplace relationships are healthier, and that my friendships are more enriching and adventurous. When disappointment is taken out of the equation and removed from our heart, that's when we begin to feel the adventure again in our relationships. That's when they begin to take on a new life. So what do your relationships and your control center, your heart, look like today? Have they been tainted and polluted by those unmet expectations? I believe that if we want to find freedom and adventure again in our relationships, we have to consider living from a guarded heart through Christ's example as a lavish giver. Thanks for listening.